This presentation is to benefit USAFE personnel by providing basic information with regards to the preliminary and initial project schedule. The first part of the presentation will cover the preliminary schedule, to be followed by the initial project schedule, and utilizing an initial schedule checklist that was developed by one of our USAFE personnel working for the Alaska District. I will show you basic items to look for and how to find them using Primavera P6. What's the big deal about the preliminary schedule? If the initial schedule is a project baseline, why do I even need to be concerned about the preliminary? The preliminary schedule is a building block for the initial schedule. It gets the schedule development process moving and involves the prime contractor, subcontractors, and government personnel. A good preliminary increases the chances of getting a good initial schedule. The preliminary provides insight on the level of detail needed, basic mechanics of the schedule, and any strengths or weaknesses in the scheduling team or process. Troubleshooting potential issues can be accomplished prior to the completion and submission of the initial schedule. Once accepted, the preliminary schedule allows for payment of progress for those activities occurring during the first 90 days. The preliminary schedule is due within 15 days of notice to proceed. Since the preliminary allows for payment for the activities occurring for the first 90 days, these activities must be detailed. The preliminary schedule will show detail for the first 90 days of work and may be summary in nature for the remainder of the time through to contract completion. The CLINs must balance in the preliminary schedule, and each CLIN must be represented in the schedule with total budgeted costs assigned to each appropriate activity. The notice to proceed and contract completion date must be in the schedule also and match the contract requirements. Any required interim milestone must also be represented. Schedule mechanics must be sound and in compliance with technical specifications. At a minimum, the activity code structure should be developed and activities assigned a responsibility, feature of work, and bid item code. The initial project schedule should be submitted within 42 days after NTP and should represent the contractor's plan to complete the project. You should be familiar with your contract requirements prior to the beginning of the initial schedule review. These are a list of the items you may want to review or at least have available during your schedule review. Technical specifications change, and what you may be familiar with from a previous project may not be what is in your current contract. Be aware of any special provisions in the contract that may affect the project construction. These provisions may be items such as phase turnovers and non-work periods. If appropriate, there should be allowances for these provisions in the schedule. Get familiar with the work. If site access is limited or project site is crowded, you want to make sure activity sequencing accounts for this. For example, if your project involves the erection of steel for multiple buildings on a congested site, you would review the logic sequence for the steel erection. If the work involves complex mechanical systems with specific commissioning procedures, you would want to make sure these are accounted for also. We will use the following checklist to review our initial schedule. The same procedure can be used to review the preliminary schedule if desired. Just remember that the detail for the preliminary schedule is only required to be for the first 90 days. I have provided my email address at the end of the presentation. If you would like a copy of the checklist, email me and I will send you a copy out. Okay, let's take a look at page 1 of the initial review checklist. First couple of sections are merely administrative. At the very top, your project name, date you received the IPS, location of the project, contractor's name, your name, and the contractor's scheduler's name. Items 1 through 4, IPS software and reporting. Some of this information can be gotten from your submittal. What reports did he provide? Did he provide a CD? Was it an XDR format? What software was the schedule done in, and what version? Items 5 through 8. This information is your contract data, and it is found in that documentation that we previously spoke about. When is your notice to proceed? When is your contract completion date? Are there any interim or phase milestones? All this information should be noted here. In addition, your bid items, your CLINs. It's a good idea to go ahead and populate item 8 here. So during your initial schedule review, you can easily go back to this item and validate whether the bid item amounts you have in your schedule correspond to the bid item amounts that are required by contract. Items 9 through 14, we're actually going to go into the software and run a schedule log, and we'll get the information being asked of us from there. If you look at the top of the section, it says Run Premier Schedule Log. Now this presentation assumes that you already have a working knowledge of P6. Let's go to the software. Okay, you can see I have a schedule open, and we were asked to run a schedule log. So we'll go to our schedule icon, and you see our schedule dialog box opens up. First thing we see is current data date. The data date of this schedule is 26 February 2015. That means that the schedule is current as of 26 February 2015. In addition, you see we have a log to file selection. If that box is not checked, you will not create a log file. So you need to ensure that that box is checked. You also need to make sure you have an address, a folder, for that file to be saved to. You just merely click the ellipses, and you would browse in your computer to select the appropriate folder. Once you have that done, you just click Schedule. Now the log file ran, but P6 doesn't automatically show it for you. You have to go back, open up your Schedule dialog box, and select View Log. Okay, now this is the log that we're asked to open up. So let's go back to page 1 of the checklist and see what information we're looking for. Okay, data date. We already saw our data date on the first sheet there when the schedule dialog box opened up. So we've got that one. Number 10, scheduling options and settings. When scheduling progress activities, use retain logic and define critical activities as longest task. So let's go back to report. And we see when scheduling progress activities, use retain logic and define critical activities as longest task. So we get a yes for both of those. Number 11, constraints. We're asked how many constraints the schedule has. We're asked about the start constraint and the interim completion milestone constraints and the project finish constraint. So under statistics, we see we have 2 activities with constraints, the start activity and the finish activity. So now we know that the number of constraints is 2. We have no interim requirements for a constraint. However, we cannot tell what type of constraint. Now let's go back to that form again. We see that we're being asked, is the constraint type an early start or start on for the NTP milestone? And is the constraint type a late finish or finish on or before for the project finish milestone? So we need to actually go to the schedule take a look at those activities and see what the constraint type is. Fortunately, I have a relatively small schedule, so I can scroll up and down through all the activities pretty quick. Here's our notice to proceed activity. We'll see we have a start over constraint of 26 February 2015. That is your NTP. That is also your data date. Notice that the date of the activity has an asterisk beside it. This indicates it has been assigned a constraint. Take a look in the dialog box at the bottom to see what type of constraint is assigned to the activity. Let's scroll down to the last activity, project completion. We see it has a finish on or before constraint of 28 June 2016. This should be your contract completion date. What's next? Let's see. Total number of activities. Number of activities on critical path. Let's go and take a look at that. We see we have 260 activities. I'm scrolling down a bit. We have 67 activities on the critical path. So 260, 67. What percent is 67 of the 260? It runs about 25%. Typically, you'll see about 20% or maybe a little bit less for critical activities. You don't want that percentage to be too high, and you don't want that percentage to be too low. Once you get experience in reviewing schedules, you'll be much more comfortable in determining whether the percentage is appropriate or not. Same with number 12. Are the number of activities reasonable for the project? There is no right or wrong answer. Once again, it goes back to experience. You would not want to have $1 million project with 10,000 activities. But then again, you wouldn't want a $10 million project with 200 activities. It all goes back to how many activities do you need to properly manage the project? How much detail do you need to estimate on a monthly basis how far the contractor is along toward completion? It's all something that you're going to learn the more experience you have. Okay, open ends, number 14. Let's take a look at the report again. We'll see activities without predecessors, that's an open end. Activities without successors, that's an open end. So we have two open ends, the first activity and the last activity. Going back to page 1, we'll see here, number 2, should be 0 not counting first and last activity, so we're good. All the activities between start and finish should be logically tied to one another. Now let's go back and talk about retained logic for a little bit. That's kind of something we just tell people, say, hey, make sure that you're not using progress override, that you're using retained logic. So what do we mean about that? Okay, so we see on this slide, the contractor's plan is to excavate the trench, then he's going to lay the bedding, then he's going to lay the pipe, and then he's going to backfill the trench. Well, typically we know a contractor is not going to excavate the entire trench before he even begins to lay bedding, which is exactly what happened. As we see here, he started the excavation. A few days later, he started the bedding, and a few days later, he started laying the pipe. Well, this kind of conflicts with his logic that he's provided to us. Now, if we select progress override in the schedule, the software does thinking for you. It says, okay, Mr. Contractor, you started lay bedding before you finished excavate trench. Obviously, there was an issue with your logic assumptions. And the schedule does not require the trench to be finished before the bedding to be finished anymore. As you can see, it basically ignores that relationship. Same thing with the lay of the pipe. it basically pulls all these activities back to the left toward the data date, giving an overly optimistic view of what is happening. Retain logic still allows you to start activities earlier than what the logic shows, but it still fixes the remaining duration of those activities to where they can't complete until after the first activity. It keeps that logic relationship between your activities. That's a bit more of a pessimistic view. Okay, let's take a look at page 2 of the initial review checklist. Item 15, USAFE mandatory requirements. These mandatory requirements were set up because Primavera has many options and settings which could potentially change how the scheduled data is calculated and viewed. Also, some of the settings and options are user-specific and do not carry over with the file export. Issues and anomalies could possibly occur, allowing the same schedule to appear differently between two users. So let's take a look and validate some of these settings. Number 1 and number 2. Activity codes are at project level and calendars are at project level. To verify that our activity codes and calendars are at the project level, we will go to your Enterprise drop-down. First, we'll check activity codes. We see our activity codes are assigned at the project level. Let's take a look at the drop-down under Select Activity Code. These are the activity codes available to this schedule. We have area, bid item, category of work, feature of work, mod, phase, responsibility, and workers per day. This information is established by the Standard Data Exchange format with required field links. This information is exported via the Standard Data Exchange format and imported into QCS. Let's take a look at our global real quick. As you can see, I have many codes in my global dictionary. This is because contractors have submitted schedules with activity codes at the global level. This could lead for a potential of data corruption. We always recommend your activity codes be set at the project level. Now let's check the calendars. Once again, we'll go to Enterprise, Calendars. We see our calendars are also set at the project level, and we have 4 calendars available for us to use. Looking at my global setup, you see I have many calendars assigned at the global level. This once again is due to contractors sending schedules which have calendars assigned to the global level. Number 3, duration type set to fixed duration in units. The quickest way to determine your duration types is by grouping and sorting. So, select your group and sort icon, and we're going to group by duration type. Okay, we see my first grouping is fixed duration in units. That is right. Now I can either scroll down to my next grouping, or by checking the minus button, I will collapse this grouping. As you can see, I also have some items defined under fixed duration in units per time. Let's take a look at those. First one, notice proceed. That is a start milestone. The second one, building dry-in. That is a finish milestone. The third, project complete, is also a finished milestone. All 3 of these are milestones, and as such, have a 0-day duration. In addition, Looking under the General tab, under Duration Type, we do not have the ability to change the duration type on these milestones. Having these three defined as fixed duration units per time is still in compliance with the mandatory requirements. Next, percent complete type set to physical. We're going to go through the same procedure. So, selecting Group and Sort, we're going to group by percent complete type. Scrolling to the top. My first grouping is physical. This is the correct definition. This is the correct type. Let's go ahead and collapse it. We see that all my activities are assigned to physical. That is correct. Let's return back to our original view. Next, time period preferences set to default. By default, we have an 8-hour day, a 40-hour week, a 172-hour month, and a 2,000-hour year. This information is not exported via your XDR export. This information is one of those admin preferences that are specific from user to user. You need to verify that your settings are 8 hours per day, 40 hours per week, 172 hours per month, and 2,000 hours per year, and you also need to assure that the contractor has the same setting. So once again, that is an admin preference. So we'll use your admin dropdown, go to admin preferences. There we see under time periods, 8-hour day, 40-hour week, 172-hour month, and 2,000-hour year. Number 6 and 7, we already saw that these were in compliance based off of page 1. But we will go into the software and I will show you where these settings can be changed. These are a schedule function. So let's go to our schedule icon, go to Options, and we see when scheduling progress activities, use retain logic. Define critical activities as longest path. Next, number 8, schedule cost loaded at lump sum labor resource. Okay, let's take a look at our resources. On the left, you'll see you'll have a resource tab. Now opening this, if you show to have many resources, just to verify what is applicable to the specific schedule, let's use our drop-down. Go to Filter By and make sure Current Project Resources is selected. As you can see, we have one resource for this schedule. In addition, under Details, you see it's a labor resource. You go to Units and Prices, you see it is $1 per hour. And it's also 8 hours per day. Go back to Activities. Number 9 and 10, activity ID values do not exceed 10 characters, and activity name values do not exceed 30 characters. There is no export from P6 that will tell you how many characters are in each data field. The easiest way to do is to go to the data field and just count it. The reason we have 10 and 30 is because when this data is exported via the standard data exchange format, the activity ID field will only consist of 10 characters, and the activity name field will only consist of 30 characters. So it's not that the schedule cannot have more than 10 and 30, it's just that only 10 and 30 will get exported to QCS. So if you find out that your activity IDs are very long, make sure that the defining portion of the activity ID is at the very beginning. The same for the activity name. If you have activity names that are longer than 30 characters long, make sure the defining portion of those names is at the very beginning. Okay, moving on. Item 16 and item 17. Those are pretty self-explanatory. Descriptions adequately define work scope. For instance, let's say you're building a brick wall or a concrete wall or painting. You have an activity called concrete and it's 20 or 30 days long. Well, what does that activity entail? Does that entail the forming? Does that entail the reinforcement placing? A generic term to this concrete, you may need to have the contractor further develop those activities or maybe better define what that activity actually is. Same goes for walls. If you have activity called wall, well, is that the framing? Is that the drywall? What exactly does that activity encompass? So whenever you see especially long duration activities with generic type descriptions, you want to go in and speak with your contractor and ask him or her, hey, what exactly does this work encompass? All activity names are unique. You don't want a bunch of activities called build wall or place concrete. You want to make sure that the activity description kind of gives you an idea perhaps of where it is or something special or specific about that feature of work. One responsible party per activity. Actually, P6 will only allow one responsibility code assigned to each activity. So we'll talk more about responsibilities, but you want to make sure that that responsibility code represents one contractor or one subcontractor. Level of detail is sufficient for size and complexity of project. We kind of spoke briefly about this a little bit earlier. This is something you're going to glean just from experience. How big is the project? How much detail do you need to monitor the progress of construction? How much detail does the contractor need to adequately build the project? This is going to be dependent upon the type of work or the complexity of the work. It's different from project to project. You may want to pull in some of your more experienced office people or project engineers if this is one of your first initial schedule reviews, just to bounce off of them, hey, what kind of detail do I need to build this facility? And being familiar with the project, that will help out a lot. The next one, required activities. Required activities, this would just require you to read through your specification and see what is stated that they need to consider in the contract schedule. Use different submittals that are in there. Now, do you want a submittal or do you want an activity for each and every submittal? No, you just want activities for the major submittal. Anything that involves a major item of work, government approvals, inspections, that type of thing. Your specification section should also list any mandatory tasks that are required. And if you have long lead materials, you probably want to consider having an activity for the procurement of those long lead materials. Okay, number 18, original durations and lags. Original durations. This is somewhat subjective. As a rule of thumb, we state that no more than 2% of non-procurement activities should have an original duration greater than 20 workdays. Okay, why is this? 20 workdays equates to about a month. This is a typical update period. Your durations for these activities should not be greater than an update period. Your estimation of percent complete is closer to what the truth is when you have shorter durations. However, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you do not want every activity to be detailed to the day. The activity duration is dependent on the type of work represented by the activity and how detailed it needs to be to monitor progress. For instance, A 20-day activity for steel placement may not be detailed enough for you. You might want to consider breaking it down by column lines. The key is to keep the schedule a usable progress monitoring tool. Now let's go to the schedule and we'll take a look at evaluating some original durations. First thing I want to do is sort by my original durations. So I go to my header and just click in my original duration column, and as you can see, we are now sorted ascending by original duration. We mentioned not only do large durations need to be evaluated, but you also want to take a look at your short durations. So let's scroll up to the 1 day. I would just scroll through the list, taking a look what was in there, and anything that seemed unusually short, I would make a note of and be sure to get with the contractor at my earliest convenience. We have punch lists for mechanical, punch lists for electrical, punch lists for architectural, all lasting 1 day. This is adequate. Once again, it depends on your scope of work and what you're building. Place slab grids, once again, 1 day. I would get with the contractor and find out whether this is the appropriate number of days for that work. Scrolling down to my larger durations. I have a number of activities that have durations greater than 20 days, some greater than 100 days. We have detailed cement structural steel, 48 days. Cement O&M manuals, 60 days. Cement blast and aluminum windows, 96 days. Detailed cement HVAC units, 111 days. Well, these are not work activities. These are your design and procurement activities. While I may want to question them, I will not necessarily look as close at them as I would my actual work activities. One thing in reviewing your durations for your submittal activities, you want to validate whether the number of days the contractor is providing for government review is the same as what is provided in the contract. If you're given 30 days to review a submittal, you want to make sure the contractor is not cheating you by perhaps giving you 14 days. Going to my 20-day work items. For instance, plumbing rough-in, 20 days. Is that adequate? Would it be better for me to have these activities broken down into more detail? Plumbing rough-in, plumbing installation, DVC rough-in. Once again, it all depends on what you're building. What elements does this consist of? It's all contract dependent. You're familiar with your project, and you should know whether or not 20 days is adequate for you to keep up with the progress of these features of work. Okay, no negative lags, no excessive lags, and lags are justified. Lags give the contractor an ability to affect the schedule without adding an activity. Lags represent a time delay across a relationship. Where appropriate, an activity should be used instead of a lag. Let's go ahead and evaluate any lag that we may have in this particular schedule. First thing I want to do is go ahead and resort by my duration. Now the method I'm going to use to view my lags is a report. Let's go to Tools, go to Reports, and select Reports. Now you may or may not have an existing report that will pull this information for you. I'm going to go ahead and create a new one. So we're adding a report. Click Add, New Report. Now lags represent something that is within a relationship of an activity. So I'm going to select activity relationships as my subject area. Once again, I have activity relationship as my subject area. Click Next. Now, first thing I'm going to do is take a look at my columns to see what information will be presented in this report and what order the information will be presented in. As you can see, currently my selected options are successor project, free float, critical, relationship type, driving, and lag. And I want to keep a couple of these, but the others I do not want in my report. So let me go ahead and take out the ones that I do not want. I do not want successor project, nor do I want free float or critical. I want to keep the relationship type, and I do not want driving. Now, information I want to see would be information related to my predecessors and successors. If I do not know which heading this information falls under, I can click Available Options, Group and Sort by List. Well, as we saw before, what I was looking for was shown in that general heading. I wanted to show you this just in case you were not sure of how to find it. So what I want is my predecessor ID, predecessor name, successor ID, and successor name. Now the order I do not want my relationship type at the beginning nor my lag at the beginning. I want to move this toward the end. Select it, using the down arrow, move it toward the end. I want lag to be at the very end. So select lag and bring it down to the very end. So my columns that I will see in my report will be my predecessor ID and name, my successor ID and name, my relationship type, and my lag. Now once again, you saw that I took some information out. You may have wanted to keep the critical column in there. It's up to you. You may want to keep the driving column in there. It's up to you. That way you can see where these items that have lags on the critical path. Let's click OK. Now let's see if we're grouped or sorted by anything. As you can see, I'm grouped by WBS. I do not want that. I'm going to remove that. Filter. Now what is the purpose of this exercise? We want to see if there are any lags in this schedule. We want to see if there are any negative lags also. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to set up a filter that will show us all positive and negative lags. First selection is where lag is greater than 0. Typing 0. We also want where lags are less than 0. We click Add. Notice it says AND. This is not an AND type requirement. It's going to be an OR. It's going to be where lag is greater than 0 or lag is less than 0. So if you notice, in parentheses, it says all of the following. Double click on that and select any of the following. And you can see it changed to OR. Once again, OR lag is less than 0. And click OK. I'm going to click Next. Now I'm going to name this report Activity Relationship Lags. Click Next. And let's go ahead and run the report. And we're going to do a quick preview. As you can see, I have my predecessor activities, my successor activities, the type of relationship between those activities, and the lag. I will just scroll through this and see if I had any questions pertaining to these lags. Notice there are no negative lags. But if there's a case where an activity may be better suited than a lag, I will definitely talk to the contractor and see if that could be corrected. Let's close this. Click Next. And we're going to save the report. The report was saved as activity relationship lags. Click OK. Go back to your activities. Number 19, calendars. Calendars define the non-work periods for activities assigned to it. You can have many calendars assigned to a schedule, but each activity can only be assigned to one calendar. Let's take a look. As we noticed before, in looking at our calendars, we had 4 calendars available at the project level to use in our schedule. We have a 6-day work week, 7-day work week, 5-day work week, and a 6-day summer work. Let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of them. Highlight the calendar, select Modify, and you can see the work days that are assigned to this calendar. This is a 6-day work week calendar. Sundays are days off. Work occurs, or work is available to occur, the rest of the week. Let's look at the 7-day work week calendar. As you can see, there are no non-work days. Typically, your 7-day calendar will be assigned to your submittals and your administrative type work. If you do find that you have work activities assigned to a 7-day calendar, you would want to make sure that that activity truly is ongoing 7 days a week. The 5-day work week calendar will be your most common calendar. As you can see, we have the weekends as non-work days. But scrolling through the calendar, there's one thing that I would mention to the contractor. It appears that there's no allowance for your non-work days on holidays. You want to make sure that any non-work day is established in your calendar. For instance, we would need a non-work day for Christmas and a non-work day for Thanksgiving for these 2 months. That would definitely be a note I would give to the contractor and bring to his or her attention. We also have 6-day summer work. Now, if you have a case where, let's say, you're placing asphalt, and where you place asphalt, the asphalt plants close a certain portion of the year, you could go in and assign a calendar for your asphalt work and have that period of time where the plant is closed set up as a non-work period. That is a useful way of a calendar, using a calendar. Now let's see which activities are assigned to the different calendars. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go to my group and sort, and I'm going to group by calendar. And scroll to the top. As you can see, these activities are assigned to my 6-day work week calendar. We'll close that up. These activities are assigned to my 7-day work week calendar. And once again, I would scroll through these, verifying that they are the typical type of work or typical type of activity that should be assigned to a 7-day calendar. And as long as you're looking, you can validate, okay, here's steel, we approve the steel shop drawings. We have 30 days. This 30 days complied with what the contract gives us. This gives you another chance to take a look at activities that are your responsibility and make sure that you're given the proper number of days to do that work. These activities are assigned to my 5-day calendar. As you can see, there's some submittal activities assigned to the 5-day calendar. That's probably okay because you figure he has a staff working 5 days of work preparing that submittal. in our 6-day summer work activity, and that's all full calendars. We have activities assigned to each of our full calendars. Let's go ahead and extend these back out for next time. And I'm going to go ahead and remove the group and sort. Okay, number 20, logic. Logic ties past common sense test. What do we mean by that? Well, do you have your framework done before your concrete's placed? Is your reinforcement in place before the concrete's placed? Are your walls placed before you paint them? Is your structural steel erected before you start doing the roof? Just flows of work that require a certain sequence to happen. You go through your schedule and take a look at common flows of work, steel, walls, that type of thing, just to make sure that there's no error in logic. Majority of activities have finish to start relationships. The majority of relationships being finished to start helps the contractor by adding some give time in the schedule. All relationships are not finished to start in actual construction. Assigning majority of the activities finished to start helps the contractor account for unknowns and gives him or her room to adjust the schedule as actual methods of construction are incorporated. The schedule is basically the contractor's best guess at that point in time, and being an initial schedule, there is a lot of development that may occur as the project moves along that the contract was unaware of. Our activity stacked, same trade working at same places, same trade having lots of work. Does he have multiple crews available? What we're going to do is take a look at the schedule based on responsibility to see how many overlapping activities that a specific subcontractor may have. And does the critical path make sense? Do you have toilet partitions on your critical path? Are there items that just don't seem right to you that they should be on the critical path? These are things you want to take a look at. So let's go ahead and look at the schedule to see what we can look at based on logic ties. So what we can do is just select a feature of work once we pass all the approvals and submittals. We'll start with place new fill at bottom of footings. Click our relationships tab. As you can see, once the contractor places new fill to the bottom of the footings, he's then going to do the form, tie, and place pier pads. So they finish and start relationship. Once he does that, he's then going to form, tie, and place mechanical shaft, and also form, tie, and place stem wall footings, grids I through E. You notice we have a driving column and a critical column. Having a check mark in the critical column means this activity is on the project critical path. Being driving means these activities are driving the interrelationship between the next activities, not necessarily the critical path. But what we'll do is we'll follow the critical path for a little bit. So once the contractor finishes form, tie, and place stem wall footings, grids I through E, then he's going to form, tie, and place piers and stem walls, grids I through F. And then that leaves us a number of activities. One of the critical ones, he's going to backfill and compact I through F. So once again, you just take a look, pick up a line of activities or a feature of work and walk through the relationships and just make sure there's nothing obvious. You can also just look at your Gantt chart. This is your Gantt chart. You can just scroll down it, taking a look at when the activities happen, Is it a logical flow? Just as simple looking at the activities is a flow from left to right, from NTP to CCD, to see if they kind of make sense in their order. Okay, we want to know if the majority of the activities have finished start relationships. I'm going to run a report to see how many activities I have do not have a finish to start relationship. So go to Tools, Reports, and we're going to add one. New report, click Next. And since we're looking for something that relates to activity relationships, my subject area is going to be activity relationships. My selected subject area is activity relationships. Once again, let's look at our columns to see what information is available to us. I'm going to clean this up a little bit by removing that information that I do not need to see on this report. I want to see relationship type, so I'm leaving that there. Once again, I want to see my predecessor ID and name, and successor ID and name. And I want relationship type to be the last column. Click OK. And let's see if we're grouped and sorted by anything. I'm currently grouped and sorted by WBS. I do not want to have that. I will remove it. Filter. Okay, like I said, I'm going to do a report that shows me activities that do not have a finish to start relationship. So, where relationship type is not equal to finish to start. Click Next. I'm going to call the report activity relationship type. Not equal. Finish to start. Next. Run report. So these are my relationships that are not finished to start. I would most definitely just take a quick look at them and validate whether the type of relationship assigned makes sense. Now we say a majority of activities we do not want them to have anything other than a finish to start. I don't know how many activities do have a finish to start relationship. Well, we could have run the report the opposite way. I don't know how many relationships I have in general. Well, a quick way to see how many relationships you have in general, and let's go ahead and take a look at that log report that we ran already. Go to Schedule, View Log. We have 405 relationships. So by looking at how many non-finish to start relationships you have, you can gauge what percentage they are compared to the overall number of relationships. Once again, this is subjective also. There is not a necessarily right or wrong answer. But if you see something that doesn't make sense to you, you most definitely want to question the contractor. Our activity stack. Same trades working. Does the plan include multiple crews? Let's take a look. What I'm going to do to view the work being done by different subcontractors is to group and sort, and I'm going to group by responsibility. scroll to the top. As you can see, these activities are the responsibility of the prime contractor. I would simply scroll down, looking at my Gantt chart, looking for activities that overlap. For instance, we have two critical path activities overlapping, setting up the temporary facility and setting up the laydown yard. Does the contractor have adequate number of personnel to be doing these two items simultaneously? Keep scrolling down. It appears that there's an overlap of the erect structural steel and install roof trusses. Not only I would question, does he have the adequate number of crews to be doing this work, is there going to be an issue with the work space being available? Why, yes, it appears that the structural steel grids I through E will be readily available for him to start installing the roof trusses. I want to make sure that there isn't going to be an issue with perhaps a crane, swinging of the steel, just a congested workspace. But once again, it's going to depend on what you're building and your type of work and your project overall. Once again, we see some more stacked activities where the work is ongoing at the same time with the same contractor. Let's look at a couple other contractors or subcontractors. Here we have our exterior finishing sub, roofing sub, nice flow of work. Our civil sub, he appears to have some work that's ongoing simultaneously. USAFE. Okay, it appears that we're going to be doing a lot of approvals during the same period of time. Do we have adequate personnel? And one thing to take special note of is we have three activities occurring simultaneously that are on the critical path. If this is valid and this is our responsibility, we need to make sure that we have proper personnel available to get these three items reviewed in a timely manner. The mechanical sub, once again, there appears to be some stacking. Does he have adequate personnel for this work to occur at the same time? Is there an issue with crowding of the space? All things that I would take a look at. Okay, let's go ahead and remove grouping. Does the critical path make sense? Let's go ahead and run a filter and look at the project critical path. Select filter, longest path. This is a default filter that you will have already established by Primavera. And once again, just scroll through the activities on the critical path, looking for any anomalies. The critical path runs through the foundation, through the steel, through the walls, into your mechanical systems and interior. And so forth. Okay, number 21, schedule of values. Are your budget dollars equitably spread throughout the project? In other words, is the project front-end loaded? Do the activities have too much scope assigned to them? Is the cost for the activity too high? If you have a design-build project, are your design activity dollars reasonable? Is it a reasonable % of the contract value? Your subcontractor dollar listings versus your responsibility code. Does the value of activities per responsibility code reasonably match what you would expect for that feature of work and for your subcontractor's costs. As there are dollars assigned to submittals, mobilization, government activities. Typically, we do not allow these unless allowed by the contract. So let's take a look. First thing I want to do is produce that earnings curve that we're accustomed to seeing, showing the projected earnings of the project from NTP to CCB. So what we'll do, we'll go View, Show on Bottom, and Resource Usage Profile. If you recall, one of the USACE mandatory requirements is that your cost be set up as a resource, actually a labor resource. Without having the cost set up as a resource, you will not be able to produce an earnings curve. So as we can see here, let's shrink this up a bit. This is our projected earnings through the project. Each type of project will have a different earnings curve. As you can see, we have some minor costs up front, very little, if any, cost during March and April, and then our costs go up to the first part and then kind of dwindle down as we would expect toward the end of the project. Notice we have 4 different histograms, or a possibility of 4 different histogram bars to be shown. Yellow represents your budgeted cost. Blue represents your actual cost, which we have done because this is an initial schedule. And green represents your early cost. Red representing your remaining late cost. We also see we have 2 lines, our curve itself. Green represents the earnings based on the early dates, and red represents the earnings based on the late dates. As long as the contractor is earning his money on a monthly basis between these 2 curves, he is on track for a timely completion. I've added a column for budgeted total cost. This way, we can take a look at each activity and see if the costs are reasonable for those activities. We see early on in the project, there's very little cost items going on. We can actually take a look at the Gantt chart and see how it correlates with our histogram toward the bottom and see how there's very little cost occurring during March and April. So what you would do, you would scroll down and just take a look at your monies and see if the values are reasonable. If you want to go ahead and sort based on dollars, just so you can pull out those high dollars, click at the heading under budget total cost, scroll down to the bottom, and here are our high dollar items. What you would do is take a look at these activities and validate whether the cost shown is reasonable. Now, getting back to the question, is the project front-end loaded? In this case, I would say no. We have our bond cost at the beginning, a slow ramp up to the work, and then a slow drop down. Once again, it depends on what is being built as to what your earnings curve is going to look like. If you were to see these spikes at the very beginning of the project, then it most definitely would be a front-end loaded contract, and you would ask that the contractor reallocate his costs throughout his activities. Once again, to verify the design activities, we would scroll through the list of activities and look at the earnings. We would also scroll through the activities to see whether we had dollar amounts assigned to submittals, mobilizations, government activities, etc. Now, to validate our subcontractors' earnings based on our responsibility code, we can once again group by responsibility code. So we're going to group and sort. group by responsibility. As you can see, I have it summarized. If you notice here, I click Show Group Totals. So my prime contractor's cost is a bit over $4 million. My exterior insulation and finishing is $360,000. Roofing is $200,000. The sub for the civil work is $1.2 million. The mechanical work is $1.3 million. Masonry is $205,000, and so forth. You can validate the monies he proposes for his subcontractor's costs against what is shown in the responsibility codes on the schedule. Does he have dollars assigned on closeout top activities? Let's take a look at that. Let's go ahead and remove our group and sorting. Scroll down to the end of the project. You can see our punch list corrections have no dollars assigned. Our O&M manuals do have $10,000 assigned. Pay attention to your specification sections. There are specification sections that do require a certain amount of money be set aside for your O&M manuals, your as-built, and so forth. So make sure you're familiar with your contract itself to see if you have that allowance in there. Okay, item 22, activity code development. The codes listed below are the activity codes that are exportable through the standard data exchange format. Let's go and take a look at the schedule and see how the contractor has developed his codes. Take note that we provide a field length. That field length must be as long as exactly shown for the export to be workable. If the field length is not as noted, the data will not export correctly. Okay, once again, to see our activity codes, we will go to Enterprise, Activity Codes. Once again, our codes are at the project level. So let's go and select our drop down. As you can see, these are the codes that the contractor has developed for use in this schedule. Here are the areas that he has defined in the schedule for use. Now if we click Modify, we can see that he has the maximum length of 4 characters for the area field. Going to BIDI, here are the 3 bid items. Once again, if we click Modify, we can validate the field length. Here are the categories of work that he has developed. Here are the features of work that have been developed. The Mod F code is to be assigned to activities that are added through modification. Currently, we have no activities that have been added through modification. This is an initial schedule, so we should not see any codes here. Here are the 3 phases that he has developed. Here are his responsibilities that he has developed. Once again, you do not want to see codes like Bob's or Rick's or some type of name of the subcontractor. you want to be able to look at it and see what his trade is: the mechanical sub, the civil sub, the roofing sub, the EIFS sub. And here we have our workers per day. One thing you want to do, once again, your bid items need to match the bid items you have in your contract. One thing that we did not discuss is validating that cost. If we group and sort by bid item, we can see the cost associated per bid item. And if we collapse each heading, we see we only are using 2 bid items in this schedule. That concludes this presentation of preliminary and initial project schedules. This training was not developed nor intended to be a replacement for interactive face-to-face training.